Hello and welcome to Colred Plays Raid Shadow Legends. I am Colred. I appreciate you being here. In today's video, we go back to Doom Tower to take on the hardest boss of them all, the Dark FAE. Now, the first time you're going to meet the Dark FAE is in normal Doom Tower on floor 40. So we're going to take you through that fight and talk about the first team that you can build to get through that first Dark FAE boss. And then we're going to go all the way to the very top. We're going to go to floor 120 of the hard Doom Tower, and we're going to take you through that fight as well. Now, you may not know this, but the reason you want to get past the Dark FAE is not just to keep moving through the tower, but also because of the forged materials that she drops. She drops FAE spheres. That's a little bit tricky to say, but FAE spheres, those are what you're seeing here. And these are materials that help you forge the lethal set, which is the best damage dealing set in the entire game. So this ignores 25% of the enemy's defense, and it also gives you an additional crit rate of 10% to help you get that crit rate you need on your nukers. So this is basically a savage set with extra crit rate. Pretty good. Now that means you're probably going to want to farm Dark FAE. I will let you know right now, getting a full auto team for Dark FAE is extremely tricky, but you can manual her fight with more success. So I highly recommend that, at least for the time being, that's where you start. We're going to put together a team that can manual this fight successfully. Okay, here we are on floor 40 of the normal Doom Tower, and we're going to go ahead and read the boss guide. Now, this fight is fairly complex. It's also pretty tricky, and you need to know exactly what happens in order to build your team properly. So there are a lot of moving parts to this one. I'm going to take it kind of slowly. We're going to work our way through this, but the most important thing is actually not one of the abilities per se. It's one of the passives, not one of the attacks, but one of the passives. Now, the passive here is FAE Mirror. This places a perfect veil on Astronyx the Dark FAE for 3 turns and spawns mirror copies of all enemies. That means your team onto Astronyx's team at the start of the battle. So what happens is she basically takes a copy of your team and puts it in front of her. Because she has perfect veil, you won't be able to target her, although AoE effects will land on her. Now, she spawns mirror copies of all enemies onto her team every time her dark energy counter reaches 5. She also places a perfect veil on herself every time her dark energy counter reaches 5, and then her dark energy counter resets after it reaches 5. So basically, when that counter reaches 5, she gets to do this all over again. So she starts the fight this way by copying your team and putting a perfect veil on herself, and then she will repeat that cycle. In order to break this cycle, what we're going to do is we're going to treat her a lot like Fire Knight. That team in front of her, that's you, that's like the Fire Knight's shield. We have to break through that team before we can really get to the Dark FAE. And then what we want to do is control the Dark FAE's turn meter, just like we control Fire Knight's turn meter, so that she gets hopefully no turns at all, or at least as few as possible. Now let's take a look at her other skills. Her A1 attacks all enemies and has a 100% chance of placing a leech debuff on each enemy for 2 turns. That will heal both the boss and the team that she has copied. So when the enemy, the duplicates of your team hit your team, they will also heal off of this leech. I'm going to skip Dark Tendrils for a moment. We're going to go down to Fairy Storm. Fairy Storm attacks all allies. All living allies will team up and join the attack. Attacks all enemies. All living allies will team up and join this attack. Damage increases by 25% for each living ally. This is an ally attack. It's very powerful, and it can easily kill a lot of your team. Dark Abduction is like a small version of FAE Mirror. Basically, she banishes one enemy champion, that means one of your champions, and spawns a mirror copy of them onto her team. Then she places a True Fear debuff on all enemies for 1 turn, and this increases Astronyx's dark energy counter by 1. So this is how that counter increases. So the big thing here is when she banishes your champion, that champion can no longer be used, and in addition, it is now on the enemy team. In the meantime, she's going to hit you with a True Fear, which is problematic in a lot of ways, so we need some way to handle that True Fear. Okay, now let's go back to Dark Tendrils. Dark Tendrils is the trickiest and most complicated of these skills. First of all, it is an AoE, and then it has additional effects depending on the affinity of the champions you bring on your team. So for any magic champions that you have on your team, it steals one random buff from each enemy, meaning each member of your team, according to the number of magic champions. So if you have 3 magic champions, it will steal 3 buffs from everybody, not just the magic champions, 3 buffs from your entire team. And remember, this is a steal, which means the boss gets those buffs. If you bring in force champions, it will steal turn meter, 10% for each force champion on your team. And again, it's a steal, so the boss gets additional turn meter. For void champions, it has a 25% chance of placing a true fear debuff on your entire team, and that goes up by 25% for each additional void champion you have on your team. So if you bring in 4 voids, this is a 100% chance to land. Finally, if you bring in spirit champions, they will heal Astronyx by 10% of her max HP for each champion. So again, if you bring in 5 spirit champions, she could potentially heal herself by 50%. Now, there are all different ways to deal with these effects, but you do want to consider the effects that are part of your team's composition, right? Because the champions that you bring determine the effects that Dark Tendrils has. The passives are the normal passives that all the bosses get. So Almighty Immunity, meaning no CCs work. Almighty Strength, meaning max HP skills don't hit as hard. And Almighty Persistence, meaning turn meter reduction is decreased. Now, despite that Almighty Persistence, we will be attempting a turn meter reduction strategy. That's really important in Doom Tower Hard floor 120. You basically don't want Astronyx to get a turn if you can help it, or as few turns as possible. Remember, the more turns that Astronyx gets, the more that dark energy counter is going to count up and potentially restart the fight by stealing your team. Turn meter reduction is not as important in normal Doom Tower, but we're still going to apply a little bit of that to our team. So let's go ahead and look at our normal Doom Tower floor 40 team. So it's always a little bit tricky for me to put together good teams to show you in these videos. One of the reasons is, as a free-to-play player, I don't have a ton of resources to rebuild champions or to gear up champions that I wouldn't otherwise use on my account. So what I've done here is I've picked 5 level 50 champions who are built pretty well. These are built pretty well, but they are level 50 champions, 1 uncommon, 3 rares, and only 1 epic. And this team is going to get the job done. So let's go into the team setup and take a look at these champions' stats. So the single most important thing about the Dark FAE fight is the mirror team. So you need to build your team in a way that makes it capable of killing your team. Remember, she steals your team and makes a mirror copy of that team. Now, she takes all of the stats, the exact masteries, everything, the armor sets that you have, everything is exactly the same. There are a couple of little tiny exceptions. For instance, I just recently heard that she doesn't steal the Stone Skin buff. So you could try using Stone Skin, but I haven't actually experimented with that yet. I just heard that last week. But for this, I'm going to basically build a team that doesn't account for any of those potential outliers. We're going to go with a team that can basically beat itself and then beat the boss. So what that means is we talked about considering Dark FAE kind of like the Fire Knight, and turn meter control does matter. We need to kill that team, that mirror team, and then take on the boss, control that turn meter so the boss doesn't cycle back to its counter and reset the fight. But simultaneously, we also want to think of our team a lot like an arena team. In fact, if you've speed tuned your arena team, that should form the basis for your Dark FAE composition. And what I mean is, when you go up against your mirror team, because those speeds are exactly the same on every champion, it's really important that your team not get disconnected in its speed tune. Because you are initiating the fight, you will technically go first. So your fastest champion will go first in the fight. However, if that's not a turn meter filler or a 100% CC champion, the enemy team is going to get to go next. And that's what we want to avoid. So if we look at my team here, I'm not bringing a bunch of CC, but I am bringing a speed-tuned team. And that's really important. So my fastest champion is Diabolist. Now, Diabolist does a turn meter fill. Her A3 fills the turn meter of all allies by 15%, and then decreases the turn meter of all enemies by 15%. Now, this is also really important. If you have any effects on your team that you want to use against your mirror copies, you have to make sure that you have the accuracy you need to land debuffs or instant effects on your own team. So you can see she has 300 accuracy, but only 104 resistance. And if I look at the resistance of all of my other champions, the highest one is Jorg, and that 187 will not resist the Diabolist's effect of 301. It's pretty close, but it shouldn't. So what that means is everybody is going to be hit by Diabolist's turn meter decrease. Now, another thing you want to consider here is if you're using a debuff or an instant effect like this is the affinities. I want to make sure that I'm going to be strong affinity or neutral affinity against everyone on my team. So again, I don't have any force affinity champions here, so Diabolist won't weak hit. I know it's complicated, but we have to think of this like a arena team going up against a mirror copy of an arena team, but instead with 5 champions. So now that I have that turn meter increase, I need to make sure that my next champion is within 15% of that speed. And that second fastest champion is Jorg. And you can see he's actually at 211. So he's very, very close to Diabolist, who's at 212. Now, Jorg also has a turn meter fill. He is going to place an increase attack buff on all allies. That's really important. I need that buff to nuke my mirror copies out. And then he's also going to fill the turn meter of all allies by 20%. So what that means is all of my other champions will get 35% turn meter and therefore push all the way past my mirror copies. Now, my third fastest champion here is Soulbound Bowyer. Again, I want to bring in squishy champions because I want to be able to nuke my mirror copies out. So she has an AoE on her A1 that has an additional 25% chance of landing a critical hit. She has an A2 that it hits very hard and it can ignore defense. And then she has an A3 that has a extra chance of landing a critical hit. Plus, it has a 100% chance of fully depleting the target's turn meter. I wish this were booked all the way out, but I'm 1 book short. Soulbound Bowyer is also in a stun set. That's going to help me in waves, and it's also going to help me against my mirror copies. But you could also build her just to hit as hard as possible. You need at least 1 nuker, if not 2 nukers, to make sure that your mirror copies die. And the reason you may want 2 nukers is kind of like you want 2 nukers in the Hydra fight. Because when the Hydra swallows one of your nukers, you need the other nuker to get it free. Well, Dark FAE does the same thing. She captures one of your champions and puts it on her team and then banishes your copy. So you need a nuker to kill that copy so that you can get it back. So my second nuker is going to be Kale. And he's running at 170 speed, but actually I even brought a third nuker, and that is Saurus, and Saurus is at 188 speed. So Saurus is going to help me not only clear the waves and get to the boss, but he does have a heal reduction that may help me prevent the Dark FAE from healing up based on the 2 spirit affinity champions that I have in my composition. I hope you're not lost yet. I know it's complicated, but the basics here are pretty simple. Build an arena team that can beat itself. And then if you have any space left over, add turn meter reduction. If you have a slow, that's also really good. You're going to want to have a tiny bit of sustain if you can get it. In this case, all I have really is Jorg as a reviver, but I do have a couple of lifesteal sets as well. Okay, so that's my team composition here on floor 40. Let's run it and see what happens. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to let the auto battle go for the first wave, but as soon as we get to the second wave, I'm going to stop it. And the reason is you want to make sure you are entering the Dark FAE fight like you are entering an arena battle with all of your cooldowns up. So I'm just going to go ahead and A1 cycle through this wave. Now you'll notice I got some stuns out there from the stun set, which is really nice. And that's going to help me make sure I get through this wave nice and easy. I can use any abilities that I don't think I'm going to need for the first turn or so of the Dark FAE fight, but I want to make sure that all my important cooldowns are available. Okay, so now you can see she steals a copy of all of my champions. And remember, their speeds and their sets and their defenses and their HP pools are exact mirror copies of mine. So only my first champion is going to go first before its mirror copy. And after that, the speeds will unfold however those teams are designed to unfold. So what I want to do is I want to make sure I get my turn meter fill. So it's not this one. I don't want to use the A2 accidentally. I want to use the A3. So here I'm going to use the turn meter fill. It looks like, yeah, it also decreases the turn meter of enemy allies or enemies. So you could see that that happened. Now I'm going to increase attack and turn meter fill again with my old Hermit Jorg. Now I've got my nukers ready to start dealing damage, and all three of them should go before the enemy. We got some stuns out there. I'm going to go ahead and try to land the heal reduction as well. And then I'm going to nuke them out with Kale. And that's unfortunate. I didn't kill the old Hermit Jorg there. He was a little bit too tanky. Sometimes that will happen with your support champions. So now I'm going to go ahead and keep playing. Luckily, I think he was stunned, so he didn't revive anyone. That was very lucky. Again, you may not have a 100% success rate with these teams because things like this can happen. But you want to just make sure that your team has the concept right. And hopefully, if you can win 70 or 80% of the battles, that's enough. Okay, we got another stun on the copy of my Kale. But again, I can't use my Kale until this copy is dead. Okay, so now that the copy is dead, the veil doesn't matter anymore, and I can hit the Dark FAE. I was saving my turn meter decrease for this very moment. So I have a 75% chance of fully depleting the target's turn meter. I believe it's a 100% chance because it's booked. So we got some turn meter decrease there. A little bit of turn meter decrease there. We got a poison, which is great. We're going to use this A2, which hits pretty hard. That was a nice big nuke. Okay. So now the boss hit me. That should have placed fears, but I guess I have enough resistance for this floor. One of the reasons I probably have enough resistance is because my Great Hall is fairly progressed. So I haven't put resistance on these champions specifically, but between my Great Hall and the resistance they have in their builds, apparently that was enough to resist the fears. Now we get the heal reduction out there, which is going to help. I want to give myself a speed boost this time. And now I'm just going to run down this boss, and it shouldn't be too long. The boss may get a couple of turns. It's hard to say. It's going to be pretty close. And that's it. Okay, so the keys, especially on the very first floor, floor 40, when you first get in here and you are building your very first Dark FAE team. Remember, think about it like a speed-tuned arena team. You can't get disconnected because you are the exact same speed as the other team. Also, try to avoid bringing in tanky champions you're going to have trouble nuking out. And then any turn meter control you can fit onto the team is going to help. Make sure you have those turn meter boosters to make sure your team goes. There is an alternative option here, which is if your fastest champion is a full 100% CC champion that isn't going to weak hit on anybody. So if you had a Void champion or a Magic champion here on this team that had 100% freeze or stun or provoke, you could potentially use that to disrupt the enemy team, and then you wouldn't have to worry as much about turn meter fill. But turn meter fill tends to be something that people pursue anyway in their rosters. So it's more likely that you're going to have that than you're going to have a 100% stun champion, let's say. That turn meter fill is also going to give you more turns against the boss, which is key to making a squishy composition successful. Because if the boss hits you too many times, you are going to die. Okay, that's it for floor 40 of the Dark FAE. Now let's go take on the real challenge. Okay, here we are all the way at floor 120 of hard mode. So let's go ahead and jump into this fight. Now, as I mentioned before, it's really tricky for me to find free-to-play friendly teams that I've already got built for these kinds of fights. And this was especially tricky. This took me several hours to figure out. And finally, I had to relent and put Ninja and Lady Kimmy on the team. There was just no other way for me to do it with the champions I already had built. I apologize for that, but you don't necessarily need these champions. You do need champions that can fulfill this role. Now, one of the tricky things about this for me was trying to bring in enough turn meter control champions that weren't too tanky so that I had trouble nuking them out, but also weren't so squishy that the Dark Fae could kill me easily, because she will hit me. I cannot prevent her from taking a turn with this team composition, but I'm going to try to minimize the number of turns she takes. Now, one thing to note about this team composition is that 3 of these champions are available to everybody, and they are the most important champions. Actually, Vizix and Allure are the 2 turn meter controllers, the primary turn meter controllers here. Arbiter gives me a little bit of healing, which is actually going to be necessary, some turn meter fill, and an increased attack, which is very useful. And then Ninja is my nuker. He is an AoE nuker. That's important. So I actually don't want to use his HP burn here. I want to use his A3, which hits the entire team. And Lady Kimmy adds additional speed and turn meter control. Remember that this team needs to get through the wave, then it needs to be able to kill itself, and then it needs to be able to control the boss. And at this level, you don't have a lot of leeway. So I am going to manual this fight just to show you how it works. Like I said, building a full auto Dark Fae team is extremely tricky, and I actually just recently broke mine for a different video, so unfortunately I don't have my full auto team available anymore. But this team should get the job done, hopefully at a high success rate, maybe 90%, which should be enough for me to go ahead and farm Dark Fae for those Fae spheres. Just quickly, I will show you the speed tune here. So we have Arbiter, who is running at 333 speed. Remember, she'll be opening with her A3, which will give everybody 30% turn meter fill. So if we look at Lady Kimmy, 30% will get her up around, what is that, about 300, almost 340. So she's just a little bit faster than the Arbiter would be at 333, so she will stay connected. Now, Lady Kimmy is also going to give us some turn meter fill. Here we get an additional 15% turn meter fill from Lady Kimmy. We also get an increased speed buff that's going to be helpful later on. But that means everybody else is going to get 45% turn meter. And so Vizix, who is running at 240, Allure, who is running at 219, and Ninja, who's running at 216, will all be within range of the Arbiter at that point. Now, if you've done the math, you know there is a little tiny bit of a gap between Ninja and Allure and the rest of the team. But the nice thing is we have Vizix here, who's got her provoke, her AoE provoke. So this is another combination here. Instead of using a CC champion as my fastest champion, I have her as my 3rd fastest champion. I'm using that turn meter fill to get to Vizix, and then I'm going to use this provoke to make sure my team doesn't get disconnected. Okay, so that's the theory behind the team. Now let's start the run and see how it goes. Just like before, I'm going to let the auto battle take care of the first wave, but then I'm going to jump in before the second wave, like any skills happen on the second wave, because I don't want any of these important cooldowns to be burnt when I get to Dark Fae. I'm going to need to have all of them available. With this much turn meter control, that shouldn't be a problem. My A1 cycling is going to be enough to take care of these waves without anybody actually taking a turn on their team. All I'm basically doing is picking the targets with the most turn meter, and I'm using my turn meter controllers against them. So Allure and Vizix are always going to be hitting the champions with the highest turn meter. Likewise, Ninja will be targeting the most dangerous enemies, which are the ones with the highest turn meter. And we're just going to try to keep them all from getting a turn. And if we can do that, then we should just be able to A1 cycle through this entire wave with no problem. One thing you may have noticed there is that my Allure took an extra turn. That is because she does have a relentless set, which gives me even more turn meter control, but makes a copy of my Allure extremely dangerous. So I have to make sure that if my Allure gets stolen, that I kill that copy very quickly. All right, I'm just going to finish off this wave and we'll get to the boss. Okay, so here we are at the beginning of the fight, the boss fight. One of the things I want to mention for the final floor of Dark Fae, for hard Doom Tower, you need to make sure that you have enough accuracy to land your abilities. And if you want enough resistance to resist the boss's abilities, you have to account for that. So that means you need enough accuracy to overcome your own resistance, but enough resistance to resist the boss. And that's pretty tricky. So typically what I would recommend, other than doing that, would be getting either a immunity set or maybe a cleanser or a block debuffs champion in order to avoid the fears. But in terms of accuracy, just to land your abilities, you need about 350 or 360 accuracy. I tend to like to overshoot, so I'll go as high as 400 just to make sure. But have it at least 350 accuracy for any champion that you want to land a debuff or a turn meter decrease. So now this speed 2 team should get me into this fight pretty well. I'm going to go first. My Arbiter is going to win the tie, right? The tiebreaker against the enemy Arbiter. And that is going to get my Lady Kimmy her turn. Now you have two options here. You can actually use this A2, which decreases the turn meter of each target and decreases their speed, or you can use the A3 that increases the speed of your team. Now, there is a chance that you could potentially get the 3% resist on the A2 because that is affecting the enemy, whereas the turn meter fill can't be resisted because it's on your own team. So that's the safer bet, and I'm going to go with that. And now here I get my Physics, and I'm going to use my Provoke and hope I hit everybody. I do. And that should prevent the enemy team from getting a real turn. I'm going to go ahead and drop defense here with my A2 on my Allure. And that's also going to do a decent amount of damage. And then I'm going to nuke with my Ninja. And I kill everybody. And that's the goal here. My nuker needs to take out the entire mirror team. Now, a nice thing also happened here, which is that my Lady Kimmy placed a block debuff buff on the boss. That's going to be very helpful. So if the boss steals my buffs, she won't get them. We got a weaken out there with our Arbiter. And now you can see we have fears and our Ninja has gotten stolen. So we need to focus out the Ninja. Because we have true fears up, I don't want to lose my cooldowns. So I'm going to try to A1 as much as possible. And depending on the RNG right here, that could determine the failure or success of my run. Now that my fear is gone, I'm going to go ahead and use some of my other skills here. Okay, now you'll notice I did take a hit there. The counter did count up. So we have the dark energy counter at 1 now. And I also don't have a healer here. My only heals are going to come from Arbiter's A3. So when my allies are below 50% HP, they will get a heal. So Physics will get a little bit of a heal here. Nobody else will. But now I want to get into my rotation and control the boss's turn meter. So as few turns as possible is the goal. So this is why autoing this fight can be really tricky, because you may need to use different skills to clear the enemy mirror team than you need to keep the boss's turn meter controlled. So basically at this point, I want Physics and Allure to only use their A1s. And I want Lady Kimmy to also control turn meter and speed as much as possible. Okay, that is basically the way this fight is going to work. I hope it's going to work out. I'm going to go ahead and manual this all the way through. It does take a few minutes. So you can stay here and watch me do this, or you can fast forward to the end, but I am going to go ahead and just play this out and hope I don't mess up. And there we go. It did take a while. 148 turns is not too bad. A couple of things you may have noticed if you watched the fight. One is that I was not using my skills optimally, and so Dark Fae got a turn that I didn't expect. She did hit my team and actually killed some of my champions, but that's why Arbiter is here, to have that revive and get everybody moving again. I'm just not quite used to Lady Kimmy yet. I just built her, so I don't have her skills as memorized as I should. The other thing you may have noticed is that because the Dark Fae takes so many turns, the HP burn that is placed by Ninja doesn't really proc on turn mechanics. It procs because Ninja activates them. So poisoners and HP burners are only good if you bring champions that can activate those poisons and HP burns. At least if you're going with a turn meter control strategy. Okay, so that is it. That is how to take down the Dark Fae. Whether it is floor 40 of normal or floor 120 of hard Doom Tower, in both cases, you want to make sure that the team that you bring can defeat itself, defeat the waves, and defeat the boss. You need to fulfill all three of those roles, and that can be pretty tricky. So don't hesitate to play this on manual, experiment with different team compositions, and remember to speed tune your team. That's incredibly important. I hope you found this guide helpful. If you have, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Definitely let me know in the comments below if your speed tune team comes in here and actually helps you get past Dark Fae. I love to hear those success stories, especially that first Doom Tower boss defeat. So either getting past your very first Dark Fae or getting all the way up here to floor 120 and finally taking it down and accomplishing one of the major feats in the game, which is clearing Doom Tower hard. Thanks so much for hanging out. I've been Colred. I will see you in another video very soon.